I woke up to the sound of a horn blaring in my driveway and, for a split second, thought I was dreaming. But when I pulled back the curtain, there she was. Karen, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen of compliance, standing in her bathrobe with a clipboard like it was a scepter, yelling at my parents' rental car as if the sedan itself had committed a felony. The horn wasn't coming from her, though. It was my dad, sitting behind the wheel with a look I recognized all too well. Half amusement, half "don't test me." He had driven 5 hours with my mom to visit me for the weekend, and the very first thing they encountered was Karen blocking their car with her body like a martyr for the HOA. "You can't park here," she shrieked, her voice carrying down the cul-de-sac with the precision of a smoke alarm. "This is a violation. Visitors must register through me first, and you did not. I'll have it towed." My dad rolled down the window, utterly calm. "We're in my son's driveway." Karen pounced on that like it was her big courtroom moment. Driveways fall under community jurisdiction when it comes to aesthetics and safety. "This car is," she squinted at the license plate as though reading hieroglyphics, "not in compliance. You didn't get a guest permit. That's a $150 fine. Consider yourself notified." I threw on a hoodie and jogged outside before this escalated into a full-fledged scene. Karen's eyes lit up when she saw me, like a cat spotting fresh prey. "Good. You're awake. Tell your guests," she spat the word like it was dirty, "that this is not some motel. We have rules, and I will enforce them." My mom stepped out of the passenger side, clutching her tote bag. She was dressed neatly, scarf wrapped around her shoulders, the same way she looked when I was a kid waiting in the school lobby. Except this time, instead of smiling at teachers, she was staring down a woman who had just called her presence a violation. "Ma'am," my mom said evenly, "we're not causing trouble. We came to see our son. Surely, there's no problem with parking in his own driveway." Karen laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they think they've already won. "If you knew how this neighborhood worked, you wouldn't even ask that. I've lived here 20 years. I built this community into what it is. People come and go, but I remain the standard. And if I say this is out of order, then it's out of order." I couldn't help myself. Funny, I thought the HOA bylaws were the standard. Her glare could have peeled paint. "Don't get smart with me. I can write you up for insubordination." Dad chuckled. "Insubordination? What is this, a military base?" That set her off. "Mock me all you want, but I have the authority here. You'll learn." She pulled out her phone and began snapping pictures of the car, my house, even my parents standing bewildered on my driveway. Each shutter click sounded like a little gunshot. "You'll regret this," she muttered, typing furiously. "I'm reporting all of it." My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't quite place, half irritation, half something else. I chalked it up to them being tired from the drive. I tried to diffuse the tension, suggesting we go inside and let Karen tire herself out on paperwork. But as we turned, Karen shouted after us, "Don't think this is over. Guests or not, I'll have my say. This neighborhood doesn't tolerate freeloaders or line cutters." Inside, my mom set her bag down carefully, as though placing a chess piece. My dad rubbed his temples, then broke into a grin. "Well," he said, "that was welcoming. I told you about Karen," I reminded them. "She files complaints if you mow the lawn on the wrong day. She fined a guy once for hanging a wind chime." My mom sat on the couch, eyes narrowed in thought. "She's overstepping. It's not her job to intimidate residents, much less guests." "Yeah, but she thrives on it," I said. "It's her empire of pettiness. Honestly, the best strategy is ignoring her." My dad leaned back, hands behind his head. "Empires fall eventually. Sometimes they just need the right nudge." I laughed, not realizing how serious he was. To me, they were just visiting parents who happened to get unlucky with a bad first impression of my HOA nightmare. But later that evening, when Karen stormed back with a printout violation slip, complete with the HOA's letterhead she clearly had no right to use, I noticed the way my parents' expressions shifted. They didn't look shocked. They looked professional. Karen slammed the paper on my front step and announced, "This is your official warning. Next time, it'll be a tow truck." "Appreciate the notice," Dad said smoothly. "By the way, could we get your full name?" "For documentation." Karen puffed up, thrilled to be recognized as the authority she imagined herself to be. "Karen Walker, HOA Board Chair." Dad's smile widened just slightly. "Perfect. Thank you." She strutted away, satisfied she'd put us in our place. But when I closed the door, I caught my parents exchanging that same loaded look again. "What?" I asked. My mom finally said it, her tone calm but laced with steel. "She doesn't know who she's dealing with." I frowned. "Meaning?" Dad picked up the violation slip, twirling it like evidence in a courtroom. "Let's just say her definition of authority is about to meet the city's definition of authority." At that moment, it hit me like a thunderclap. My mom wasn't just a retiree with a love of gardening. She was still an active deputy director for city code enforcement. And my dad? He wasn't just any visitor. He was a senior planner in the city development office. The clipboard warrior outside had just declared war on people who literally wrote half the rules she was pretending to enforce. And judging by the look in their eyes, they weren't going to let this slide. The next morning, I heard the faint grind of heels on pavement before I even opened the blind. Sure enough, there was Karen, patrolling the cul-de-sac with her clipboard like she was conducting military drills. She stopped in front of my driveway, crouched slightly, and ran a finger along my parents' rental car's bumper as if she were inspecting it for contraband. I had to hand it to her. Her commitment to the act was something else. My mom, however, had already positioned herself by the kitchen window, sipping her tea with the patience of someone who'd been waiting for this moment her entire career. "She's escalating," Mom said matter-of-factly. "That's strike two." "Strike one being the drive-by screaming match?" I asked. "No," she said with a faint smile. "Strike one was her putting her name on an official-looking violation form. That's impersonating authority. Not a good look legally." Dad emerged from the guest room with his laptop under his arm, already typing as he walked. I checked the city database. Guess what? This HOA filed only half the annual compliance reports they're supposed to. And our friend out there, he nodded toward Karen, who was now photographing a mailbox as though it might confess to a crime, is listed as the contact person for all of them. I blinked. "You did that research in one night?" "Old habit," Dad said. "I like to know who I'm up against." I wanted to argue that this wasn't their fight, that they were just here for the weekend. But before I could, Karen marched up the walkway and banged on the door with the back of her clipboard. The sound echoed through the house like a police raid. When I opened the door, she held up a laminated page that looked like it had been designed on Microsoft Word in 2003. "Guest vehicles," she barked, "are restricted to the overflow lot by the tennis courts. That's HOA policy. Your parents need to move this car immediately, or I'll have it towed at your expense." Dad stepped forward, utterly calm. "We read your notice. Just one question. Does your policy supersede municipal parking code?" Karen sneered, clearly not used to being challenged in her own kingdom. "Municipal code doesn't apply here. This is private property." Mom tilted her head. "That's interesting. Because under Section 8.14 of the City Residential Development Act, all driveways remain under dual jurisdiction. Which means you're bluffing." For a moment, Karen's jaw hung open like a marionette with its strings cut. Then she recovered, puffing up again. "I don't appreciate outsiders lecturing me about the rules. I've kept this community in order for 20 years. I know what I'm talking about." Dad's voice stayed cool, measured. "Then you won't mind if we request to see the official bylaws, signed, filed, and current, because the last ones on record with the city expired 5 years ago." Karen's face flushed crimson, but instead of answering, she snapped more photos of the car, then spun on her heel and stormed away. Mom exhaled, setting her teacup down with deliberate calm. She's not just entitled. She's reckless. This isn't about rules, it's about control. Dad sat at the dining table, opening his laptop again. Then maybe it's time someone reminded her where her authority ends. I wasn't sure whether to be horrified or impressed. My parents weren't raising their voices, they weren't threatening, they were playing this like chess, already 5 moves ahead. That afternoon, Karen doubled down. She showed up with 2 other HOA board members, both men in polos tucked too tightly into khakis, like her personal entourage. They stood on my driveway as though they were serving an eviction notice. "This is your last chance," Karen announced, theatrically waving another violation slip. "Either your guests move their car or we take action." The taller board member added, "Rules are rules. We can't make exceptions, or the whole community falls apart." Dad leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Gentlemen, let me ask you, are you comfortable being legally responsible for trespass and harassment? Because that's exactly what this is starting to look like." Karen barked a laugh. "Harassment? Please. You should be thanking me for keeping this place in order." Mom finally stepped outside, her voice low but sharp. "What you're doing isn't order. It's intimidation. And trust me, if you keep this up, the city will take notice." Karen squinted at her. "And who exactly do you think you are?" My mom's smile was almost gentle. "You'll find out soon enough." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't expecting pushback. Karen tried to rally, snapping, "Fine. We'll tow it. Don't say I didn't warn you." Then they stormed off, leaving my parents calm and collected while my nerves buzzed like live wires. That night, over dinner, Mom laid out her plan like a general before a campaign. "We're not going to humiliate her. We're not going to scream. We're going to document everything, every violation of procedure, every overreach. And when the time is right, we'll file it properly." Dad added, "And until then, we play along. Let her think she's winning. People like her always overextend when they think no one can touch them." It was unsettling watching my parents in this mode. I'd grown up with them as loving, steady, sometimes strict, but this was different. This was their professional side, honed from years of enforcing laws and designing city code. And Karen had no idea she'd stumbled into their territory. The next morning, the tow truck showed up. Its rumble shook the street as it pulled into our cul-de-sac, Karen standing proudly beside it like she'd summoned a dragon. The driver hopped out, looking at the rental car, then at me. "This the one?" Karen shoved the violation slip into his hand. "Yes. Unauthorized vehicle. Remove it immediately." Dad strolled out onto the driveway, casual as anything, holding a folder. "Before you hook it, you might want to look at this." He handed over a printed copy of the actual city ordinance, complete with highlighted sections about driveway jurisdiction. "Tow this car, and you're in violation of city code. Which means you, not her, will be liable." The driver frowned, reading. His eyes flicked to Karen, who was sputtering like a teakettle about to blow. "Lady, you didn't say anything about city code." Karen jabbed a finger at him. "Ignore him. He's bluffing. Tow it." But the driver held up his hands. "No way. I'm not risking my license over this. Settle it yourselves." He climbed back in his truck and drove off, leaving Karen standing in the exhaust cloud, speechless for the first time since I'd met her. Dad turned to her with perfect calm. "That's strike 3. Karen didn't answer. She just stormed away, clipboard clutched like a shield, her whole performance unraveling at the seams. Inside, I finally let out the laugh I'd been holding. "You two are terrifying." Mom gave me a sly smile. "Only to people who think rules are their personal weapon. To everyone else, we're just civil servants." But I could see it in their eyes, they weren't done. They were just getting started. And Karen, in her arrogance, had no idea the ground beneath her feet was already crumbling. By the third day, the cul-de-sac was buzzing. Karen had not only failed to get my parents' car towed, but had somehow managed to make the tow truck driver laugh in her face before leaving. Word traveled quickly in our little HOA kingdom. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, curious about the new battlefield forming on my driveway. Some even gave me subtle nods of solidarity, though no one dared openly defy Karen. That was her power. People feared her paper threats more than they hated her antics. But now the tone was shifting. She had lost, publicly, in front of witnesses. For a woman who thrived on intimidation, that kind of humiliation was gasoline on a bonfire. Sure enough, she returned that morning with a new tactic. She wasn't alone. She had 3 neighbors in tow, all members of her so-called compliance committee. They weren't particularly fearsome. One was a retired accountant who always mowed his lawn diagonally, another was a woman who glared at children for riding bikes too fast, and the last was a man who lived alone and seemed to enjoy siding with Karen out of sheer boredom. They gathered in a semicircle on my driveway as though staging an official tribunal. This neighborhood, Karen announced, clipboard raised like she was reciting Holy Scripture, has always valued peace and uniformity. But lately, certain households have chosen to undermine those values. She shot a glance at me. This behavior will not stand. We have scheduled a disciplinary hearing. Dad stepped onto the porch with his mug of coffee. He didn't even look at them at first. He looked at the sky, the trees, the world in general, as though this entire scene was just background noise. Then he spoke in the calmest voice I'd ever heard. A hearing? Karen puffed up, proud of her theatrics. Yes, tonight. At the clubhouse. Attendance is mandatory. Mom appeared beside him, hands clasped, her expression polite but sharp enough to cut steel. On what grounds are you convening this hearing? Karen didn't hesitate. Violation of guest vehicle policies, disrespect of board authority, and hostile behavior toward community officers. I couldn't stop the laugh that slipped out. Hostile? That's rich. My dad literally quoted the law to you. Karen snapped, exactly. Arguing with the board is hostile. Dad sipped his coffee. Noted. We'll be there. Her smile widened, confident she had cornered us at last. She turned on her heel, entourage following like ducks in formation. When they were gone, I muttered, "You can't be serious. You're actually going." "Of course," Mom said. "Never decline an invitation to the other side's battleground. That's where they overplay their hand." Dad set his mug down. "And besides, I'd like to see how she runs her little court." That night we walked into the clubhouse. The room smelled of coffee and old carpet, with folding chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a long table where Karen and her board sat. She had even brought a little gavel, probably ordered online, which she tapped against the table like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. "Order," she barked. "We will now begin the disciplinary hearing against resident." She checked her papers dramatically, Unit 47, for violations of community standards. I sat down, barely containing my grin. My parents sat on either side of me, looking as relaxed as if they were at a neighborhood potluck. Karen started strong, parading photos of the rental car on a projector screen, complete with red arrows and bold captions like "NON compliant." She read from a sheet of charges that sounded like they'd been cobbled together from old meeting notes and half-remembered bylaws. Every so often, she glanced at the crowd of neighbors who had come to watch, as though fishing for applause. When she finished, she slammed the gavel again. "The board recommends a fine of $300 and mandatory relocation of the offending vehicle to the overflow lot. Do the defendants have anything to say for themselves?" Mom rose slowly, deliberately, and placed a neat folder on the table. "Yes, we do." Karen smirked, clearly expecting some desperate plea. But Mom opened the folder and began reading, her voice steady and professional. "According to Section 3 of the HOA Charter, this board is required to maintain up-to-date bylaws filed with the city. You have not. According to Section 12, You are not authorized to impose fines without prior approval from a compliance officer certified under municipal code. None of you are certified. And finally, according to the city's Residential Development Act, individual driveways cannot be regulated by HOA guest policy. Meaning everything you've just said is invalid. Karen's smirk cracked. She tried to interject, but Mom raised a hand, silencing her with the ease of someone who had silenced far louder opponents. Dad stood next, producing another set of documents. Furthermore, we have records showing this HOA has failed to submit annual reports for 3 of the past 5 years. That's a direct violation of your charter. If this hearing is officially recorded, then what you're doing tonight is not just meaningless, it's illegal. The room went dead silent. The accountant board member cleared his throat. Karen, is this true? Karen slammed her gavel again, harder this time, the sound sharp and desperate. Irrelevant. This is my board, my community, and I will not be lectured by outsiders pretending to be experts. Mom gave her a smile so calm it was terrifying. We're not pretending. I'm Deputy Director of City Code Enforcement. And my husband here is Senior Planner for Development. You've just staged a sham hearing against 2 city officials. The words detonated in the room like dynamite. Neighbors gasped. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One actually slid his chair back, as though trying to physically distance himself from the blast radius. Karen's face drained of color. That's impossible. You're lying. Mom pulled out her city-issued ID badge and placed it on the table. Dad did the same. Their names, titles, photos, all official, all undeniable. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, the bachelor board member muttered, Karen, you didn't tell us. Karen's voice cracked. It doesn't matter. They're still residents. They still have to obey me. That was the moment the spell broke. A murmur rippled through the room. Neighbors who had been cowed into silence for years were suddenly whispering, exchanging glances. They saw what I saw. The Queen's crown had been knocked clean off. Dad leaned forward slightly, his voice still soft but carrying the weight of finality. No, Karen. Residents obey the law. And the law doesn't bend to your clipboard. The board meeting collapsed in chaos. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her gavel until the handle snapped. The accountant excused himself, muttering about needing to check the charter. The neighbors, emboldened, began openly questioning her. Do we really have to pay all these fines? What about those landscaping fees you invented last year? It was as though the whole neighborhood had woken from a long sleep. We walked out into the cool night air with the faint sounds of shouting still echoing behind us. My parents didn't look triumphant. They looked steady, resolved, like people who had done exactly what they'd come to do. I broke the silence first. You two just detonated a bomb in there. Mom's smile was wry. Sometimes the only way to fix rot is to expose it. The day after the hearing, the neighborhood felt different. I noticed it as soon as I stepped outside to grab the paper. For once, Karen wasn't prowling around with her clipboard. Instead, she sat stiffly on her porch across the street, lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now gave me small, conspiratorial wave. Someone even muttered, "Good job last night," as they passed with their dog. It was as if the collective spell Karen had cast over everyone for years had cracked wide open. But the thing about people like Karen is that they don't crumble quietly. They reassemble themselves with sharper edges. By midday, the first retaliation arrived. A letter, slipped under my door without a stamp, printed in block letters that screamed aggression. Notice of community review, it read. Pending violations include lawn neglect, improper lighting fixtures, and unauthorized guest occupancy. At the bottom was Karen's signature, underlined 3 times as though her pen could etch authority into existence. I handed the letter to my dad, who scanned it with the same expression he used to have when reviewing my sloppy teenage homework. "This is laughable," he said, pointing to the claim about lighting fixtures. Your porch light is city standard issue. She's just fishing. Mom folded the letter neatly. Let her dig. Every false claim she makes is another nail in her own coffin. Still, part of me couldn't shake the unease. Karen had lost ground publicly, but that only meant she would get more desperate. And desperation makes people reckless. That evening, as I was grilling dinner in the backyard, I noticed a red glow near the fence line. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from a neighbor's lantern. But then I realized it was the beam of a phone camera, peeking over the fence. Karen's voice carried through the dusk. Documenting unauthorized structures, she muttered loudly enough for me to hear. Look at that grill. Violates fire safety standards. And that shed? Non-compliant. Illegal storage. I nearly dropped the spatula. Are you serious right now? I called out. She didn't respond, just kept recording like a paparazzi chasing a scandal. My dad appeared beside me, calm as ever. Perfect. Evidence of harassment. Keep doing what you're doing, don't engage. Let her bury herself. It was easy for him to say, but harder for me to ignore the fact that my neighbor was literally filming my barbecue like it was a crime scene. 2 nights later, it escalated again. We woke up to the sound of hammering. By the time I stumbled outside in my slippers, Karen and her so-called compliance committee had erected a temporary orange fence across the entrance of my driveway. A giant laminated sign flapped in the breeze. Guest parking restricted. Violators will be fined. The absurdity hit me first, followed by a surge of anger. She had literally blocked my parents' car in my own driveway. My mom appeared behind me, calm but with a glint in her eyes that told me this was exactly the kind of mistake she'd been waiting for. This, she said, snapping a photo with her phone, is unlawful obstruction of private property. We'll need time-stamped documentation. Get the angles. Dad was already filming with his phone, narrating in that steady voice of his. Temporary barricade erected without permit. Unauthorized signage displayed. Intent to intimidate residents. He zoomed in on Karen, who was standing proudly beside her makeshift blockade, as if she'd just won a war. You can't move it, she snapped when she saw us. That would be destruction of HOA property. Karen, Dad said, lowering his phone, this is not HOA property. This is trespassing. And every second you leave this fence up is another violation. Her smile didn't falter. Take me to court then. I'll win. I always win. But for the first time, I noticed something beneath her bravado, a twitch in her jaw, a flicker of doubt. By the following morning, word had spread about the barricade. Neighbors came by to see it, whispering, shaking their heads. Some even recorded it themselves. The more attention Karen got, the more rigid she became, standing guard like a sentry over her bright orange monument to pettiness. That afternoon, Mom made a quiet phone call. She didn't say much, just the bare details. Unauthorized obstruction. Multiple witnesses. HOA board exceeding jurisdiction. Then she hung up, her face unreadable. Who was that? I asked. She gave a small smile. The city. The next day, 2 white city vehicles rolled into the cul-de-sac. Out stepped a pair of inspectors in official jackets, clipboards in hand. The neighbors emerged from their houses like it was a parade. Karen froze on her porch, clutching her own clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. The inspectors walked straight to the barricade, examined it, took photos, and exchanged a few quiet words. Then one of them turned to Karen. Did you authorize this structure? Karen stammered. As head of the HOA, I. The inspector cut her off. Ma'am, this constitutes obstruction of private property without permit. That's a violation of city code. You'll need to remove it immediately. Karen's face burned scarlet. But this is community enforcement. I was protecting our neighborhood standards. The second inspector raised an eyebrow. You don't have the authority to override city code. Remove it, or the city will remove it for you and issue fines to the HOA. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered neighbors. Karen's fortress had just been leveled by something she couldn't shout down: actual authority. She sputtered, tried to argue, but the inspectors ignored her, turning instead to thank my parents for their cooperation. That small gesture, 2 officials acknowledging them in front of everyone, was the final nail in the illusion of Karen's untouchable power. By evening, the barricade was gone. Karen dismantled it herself in a fury, yanking poles out of the ground, muttering curses under her breath as neighbors filmed from their porches. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, still processing everything. "You realize you just turned this whole street against her, right?" I asked my parents. Mom poured herself tea, calm as always. "We didn't turn them. She did. All we did was let her show them who she really is." Dad nodded. "But she won't stop. Not yet. She's cornered now, and cornered people are dangerous." I wanted to believe it was over, that the barricade fiasco had broken her, but deep down I knew they were right. Karen wasn't the type to retreat gracefully. She'd double down, even if it destroyed her. And sure enough, late that night, as I was taking out the trash, I saw her through her living room window. Lights blazing, papers scattered across her coffee table, phone pressed to her ear. She was pacing, gesturing wildly, her face twisted with determination. Karen wasn't finished. She was plotting something bigger. And for the first time, I felt a twinge of unease that even my parents' calm couldn't erase. The storm broke 2 nights later. Literally and figuratively. A summer thunderstorm rolled in, pounding rain against the rooftops and rattling the trees. I stood at the living room window, watching lightning streak across the cul-de-sac, when I noticed movement outside. Even through the downpour, I recognized the unmistakable silhouette of Karen, hunched under a giant umbrella, dragging a cart toward the clubhouse. Something about the urgency in her stride set my stomach on edge. When I mentioned it, Dad didn't even look surprised. "She's not retreating," he said. "She's regrouping. That clubhouse is her throne. If she can rally the board, she'll try to stage a power grab before the dust settles." Mom closed her laptop and picked up her coat. "Then let's not let her write the narrative. Time to end this." I wanted to protest. I was tired, soaked in dread, and honestly just wanted my quiet life back. But the determination in my parents' eyes told me this wasn't optional. We grabbed umbrellas and headed across the street, rain pelting down like nails on tin. Inside the clubhouse, we found Karen and half a dozen board members gathered around folding tables piled with papers. The air was humid, buzzing with fluorescent light and tension. Karen's hair was plastered to her forehead, but her voice was still sharp, slicing through the room. "They're trying to destroy us," she hissed, waving one of her infamous violation slips like a battle flag. "If we let them win, this community will collapse. We need emergency measures. Immediate fines. Revoking privileges. Total lockdown." The board members shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others staring at their hands. Mom cleared her throat as we entered, her voice calm but carrying across the room. "Lockdown? Over a rental car." Karen spun, eyes wide with fury. "You don't belong here. This is an internal board meeting." Dad stepped forward, rain dripping from his jacket. "Correction. This is a community meeting, and we are residents. Residents have a right to attend." Karen's face twisted. "You're not here as residents. You're here to undermine me. To make me look weak in front of my own board." Mom's reply was soft, almost pitying. "You didn't need us for that, Karen. You did it all on your own." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the board members, the retired accountant, finally spoke up. "Karen, maybe we should slow down. Some of these fines, they're not even in the bylaws." Her head snapped toward him. "You're either with me or against me." That was the crack we'd been waiting for. Dad laid a folder on the table, water-stained but still intact. "We've documented everything. The false fines, the harassment, the barricade. It's already filed with the city. By tomorrow, this HOA will be under formal review." Gasps erupted. A few neighbors in the back whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Karen's face flushed crimson, but she didn't back down. Instead, she slammed her fist on the table so hard the gavel rattled. "You think the city scares me?" she shouted. "This is my neighborhood. I've held this community together for 2 decades. Do you think anyone else could keep it this perfect? Without me, it would be chaos." Mom stepped closer, her voice calm and steady like a scalpel. "It's already chaos, Karen. Because of you. Look around. These people aren't united, they're afraid. And fear isn't leadership." For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, the thunder holding its breath. Then the other board members began to speak. One by one, they voiced doubts, hesitations, grievances they'd never dared share. The woman who always glared at kids admitted she'd been pressured to file complaints she didn't believe in. The board bachelor said he only went along with Karen because he didn't want to be her next target. Even the accountant confessed he thought the endless landscaping fees were suspicious. The tide had turned. But Karen wasn't finished. With a sudden, desperate motion, she grabbed the stack of violation slips and hurled them into the air. Papers rained down across the room, fluttering like white flags that refused to surrender. "You're all cowards," she screamed. "Without me, you're nothing. You'll see. You'll beg me to come back." And then she stormed out into the rain, leaving the clubhouse in stunned silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mom quietly began gathering the scattered papers into neat stacks. "The city review will proceed," she said. "In the meantime, this board needs to appoint interim leadership. Choose someone who listens, not someone who dictates." The accountant cleared his throat, then turned to the room. "I nominate myself as acting chair. Temporarily, until the review is complete." The others nodded, some with relief, some with hesitation. But no one objected. For the first time in years, Karen's grip had been broken. We walked home in the storm's aftermath, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. The street was quiet, save for the hum of crickets and the drip of water from the gutters. My parents didn't look triumphant, they looked tired but satisfied. Inside, as we toweled off, I finally asked the question that had been nagging me. Why go through all this? You could have just ignored her. Let her rant and rave. Dad gave me a small smile. Because people like Karen don't stop at ranting. They escalate until someone stops them. And if not us, then who? Mom added, besides, sometimes the law isn't about punishment. It's about restoring balance. Tonight, that balance shifted. I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, as I was sipping coffee, I saw Karen one last time. She was loading boxes into the trunk of her SUV, her movements jerky, almost frantic. The clipboard was still tucked under her arm, as if she couldn't bear to let it go. For a second our eyes met. Rainwater still streaked her hair, her expression somewhere between rage and resignation. She didn't say anything, just slammed the trunk shut and drove off down the street. Neighbors emerged slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether the air had truly changed. Some smiled, some sighed, some shook their heads. The Queen was gone, at least for now. My parents sat with me on the porch, quiet, watching the neighborhood settle into a new rhythm. Finally, Mom said, "She'll turn up somewhere else. People like her always do. But she won't haunt this street anymore." Dad raised his mug in a mock toast. "To peace. However long it lasts." I clinked my mug against his, a laugh bubbling up despite the exhaustion. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac felt like it belonged to its residents, not its tyrant. And as the morning sun burned through the clouds, I realized Karen's reign had ended not with a bang, but with the steady, patient persistence of people who refused to bow. For once, the quiet wasn't ominous. It was freedom.